The doors to the great hall crashed open hard enough to rattle the iron sconces, and every wolf in the room dropped, not gracefully, not ceremonially. They folded as if an invisible hand had pressed between their shoulders and shoved. Knees struck stone with a crackling chorus. Goblets tipped and spun. One silver platter rang against the floor and skidded into a table leg. 100 voices cut off in the same shocked inhale. I stayed standing. My wolf rose inside me like a wall of fire and bone, every instinct in me splitting into two opposing orders. Submit. Do not submit. And only one survived. Muscles in my thighs trembled from resisting a force I had never resisted before. My jaw locked. My heartbeat stuttered once, then hit hard enough that I felt it in my teeth. Dowager Queen Morwen Drake entered under the antler arch with her silver war braid and black mourning fur, and the entire banquet bowed by court custom the way every wolf had bowed for her since before I was born. Marshal Voss Cade, blade at his hip, stared up at me from one knee. My Aunt Taryn's fingers clawed at my sleeve, trying to drag me down, eyes wide with alarm and calculation. King Lucian sat frozen at the high table, his jaw locked so tightly a tendon jumped near his ear. I couldn't move. Not down. Not even if they killed me. Morwen's gaze found me immediately. "Who?" she said softly, and somehow that was worse than a roar. "Remains upright in my hall?" Ilya Thorne surged to his feet before anyone else could answer, his smile knife-thin and eager. "Raven Wildfire, Majesty, Envoy's daughter. She refused your dominance call. In this court, that is treason." No one breathed. Then Morwen took one slow step forward, and my wolf bared her teeth beneath my skin. 6 hours earlier, I had believed I was walking into peace. The road to Ironwood Keep climbed through pines that still held the scent of early frost, though harvest moon had painted every valley gold. Fog lay in the low hollows like cooling ash. Our carriage wheels cut through old ruts worn by 12 years of annual treaty banquets, one banquet every year since 2014, since the Ashfall ceasefire stopped the border raids and replaced them with negotiations, threats, and very expensive dinners where people smiled while deciding how many of us would starve in winter. Taryn sat opposite me with a satchel full of legal tablets and a face like carved cedar. She had trained me as an envoy since 2024, drilling me on precedence law, corridor maps, succession customs, and the exact difference between an insult you swallowed and one you made public. I had blood under my nails from pressing script marks into wax seals all week. She called that good preparation. I called it the shape of dread. "Say it again," she told me without looking up from her notes. "Spring shortages worsened after the South herds shifted," I recited, hands clasped to hide the tremor. Emberpack requests temporary access to the Hollow Run corridor under shared patrol for a 5-year term. In return, we release grain reserves at fixed rates and agree to river toll caps. Better. Less speed. Your urgency reads as weakness when men are hunting leverage. She made a correction on a slate and slid it back to me. Again. I repeated it. She nodded once. Now the interruption response. I sighed and switched cadence. "With respect, Majesty, this proposal does not alter Crown authority over border adjudication. It clarifies enforcement obligations and reduces raid incentive before first freeze." "Good." She snapped the slate closed. "Keep your voice lower when Lucian interrupts." I tried not to react at his name and failed. Taryn's mouth twitched. Almost sympathy, mostly warning. "This is politics, Raven. Not devotion poetry." "I am aware. Are you?" She finally met my eyes. "King Lucian Drake has not seen you since midwinter. He may look at you as if there is nobody else in the room. He may look at you as if you are furniture. Neither look alters the vote count." Outside, the keep rose from the ridge like a clenched fist of black stone and old banners. Crows wheeled above the battlements. Below those walls, market tents had thinned since spring. Even from the road you could see fewer livestock pens, fewer grain carts. Scarcity had a look. So did fear. Inside those walls waited a council that could open hunting corridors or close them until children in 3 border packs learned hunger as their first winter lesson. Also inside those walls waited Lucian, who had once in snow behind the observatory where no courtiers could overhear, pressed his forehead to mine and whispered, "When this stabilizes, we do this openly." He had smelled like cedar and storm and impossible things. I hated myself a little for still remembering the exact angle of his hand at the back of my neck. At the ironwood gate, guards checked sigils and escort writs, then ushered us through with formal salutes that were courteous without being warm. Courtiers glittered through the inner yard in metal-threaded velvet, their laughter bright and brittle. Stable hands moved quickly with their eyes down. Rumors moved faster than servants. Food tensions, border patrol skirmishes, Morwen's return to public ritual, which claimant would challenge Lucian's corridor plan, whether Emberpack had overreached by sending Taryn and her niece instead of a full Alpha delegation. "Keep your shoulders open," Taryn murmured as we climbed the grand steps. "Predators smell fear." "I'm not afraid." "Good, you're terrified. Terror makes you cautious." Inside, the receiving chamber blazed with chandeliers and mirrored bronze. Marble wolves ran in relief along the walls, each one with a gemstone eye. Their stone mouths looked perpetually mid-snarl. Lucian stood near the throne dais in formal black, crown resting light on dark hair as if he had forgotten it was there. He was taller than memory and thinner around the eyes, as though ruling had filed him down without changing his edges. He saw me. Something in his expression softened, almost painfully, then shuddered so fast I thought I imagined it. "Envoy Terran Wildfire," he said, voice carrying across the chamber with perfect control. "Ironwood welcomes Ember's delegation." "Your Majesty." Terran bowed with perfect depth. I followed her. When I rose, Lucian was no longer looking at me. He was speaking with Marshal Voss about seating hierarchies and security lanes, exactly as if we had never shared a secret, never argued over patrol ledgers at midnight, never touched at all. That hurt more than I expected. It also made me angry enough to stand straight. The banquet hall smelled of roasted venison, smoke leaf, spiced pear, and expensive polish over old stone. Heat from braziers lifted the scent of damp wool from cloaks hung near the walls. Musicians tuned by the gallery, strings whining softly before settling into key. Nobles arranged themselves by rank, alliance, and grudges, old enough to have grandchildren. We were placed halfway down the eastern table, honored but not central, visible but not influential. "Controlled visibility," Taryn whispered as we sat. "He wants us present, not decisive." I scanned the hall for threats the way she taught me. Exits first, then armed retainers, then the men smiling too easily. Ilya Thorne lounged near the western colonnade with 2 lesser lords, laughing too loudly at something no one else heard. Ilya was descended from a collateral branch of Drake blood, close enough to claim legitimacy when convenient, and far enough to weaponize chaos when bored. He met my gaze and lifted his cup in mock salute. I looked away first because I was disciplined, not because he unnerved me. When the first course was cleared, Lucian rose for formal opening remarks. His voice rolled warm and steady over the hall, thanking delegates, invoking the ashfall terms, affirming urgency. He spoke of spring 2026 shortages, damaged migration routes, the responsibility of leaders to prevent famine-driven raids before desperation became violence. He was good at this. He always had been. When he spoke numbers, men listened. When he spoke duty, even cynics pretended to have some. Then Lord Bren of North Fen stood and said what everyone had been waiting to bait from him. "If I may, Majesty, Rumor says Ember's proposal is not merely legal, but personal. We hear you have taken uncommon interest in their young envoy. A rustle of amusement moved through the tables. Someone chuckled into a sleeve. Someone else muttered, "At last." My pulse kicked against my throat. Lucian didn't even blink. Rumors are the first refuge of men with no maps and no numbers. A few people laughed. Bren smirked. Then deny them plainly. For the hall. Lucian's gaze swept the room, landed on me for the briefest second, and hardened. Plainly then, I have no bond with Raven Wildfire, no private claim, no intention of elevating her beyond her delegation station. Ironwood policy will not be compromised by youthful infatuation. The hall rewarded him with relieved laughter, the sound of tension breaking in all the wrong places. I sat perfectly still while humiliation crawled hot under my skin like fever. Across from me, Lady Maris covered a grin with her napkin. 2 seats down, Ilya looked delighted. A courtier near the hearth whispered something about ambitious little embers, and his table laughed into their wine. Taryn's hand closed over my wrist under the table. Not comfort, just pressure. Stay in position. Do not bleed in public. Lucian continued speaking as if nothing had happened, as if he had not just stripped me bare in front of every predator in the kingdom and called it statecraft. My wolf, usually quiet, lifted her head. When the speech ended, applause rolled. Servants poured dark wine. The musicians resumed with a fast reel no one was listening to. Nobles leaned toward one another and began dissecting me like a carcass. I wanted to leave. I wanted to set the tapestries on fire. I wanted to walk to the dais and ask Lucian whether this was what openly meant in king speech. I wanted to prove I could wound him too. Instead, I drank water and rehearsed treaty clauses in my head while my ears rang. By the time the outer doors slammed open and Morwen entered, I was all fracture and restraint. Then her dominance call hit the hall like thunder under skin, and every wolf dropped involuntarily. Except me. The moment stretched thin and dangerous. Morwen stopped before the first rank of kneeling lords and looked up at me as if I were an unfamiliar weapon. "You resist instinct," she said. "Either you are broken, or you stand at equal rank." Ilya stepped in before anyone else could shape the narrative. "Or she is a traitor gaming superstition. The law is clear. Defiance at ceremonial entry is sedition." "The law is rarely clear when men like you quote it." Taryn snapped from her knee, voice sharp despite the strain in her posture. Morwen raised a hand for silence, and silence obeyed. Marshal Voss stood slowly, eyes on me, not his blade. "Majesty, under the old court precedents, refusal to bow is not automatic treason. It can indicate equal or higher dominant status. The matter requires witness circle review." Ilya scoffed. 7 elders to entertain a banquet insult? 7 elders to prevent civil bloodshed, Voss said evenly, as custom demands in succession disputes. Lucian descended from the dais at last. He came to stand 2 paces from me, close enough that I could smell smoke and iron on him. Up close he looked furious, and not only at me. "Raven," he said quietly, too quietly for most of the hall. "Kneel now and I can contain this." I met his eyes. Contain what? Me? Or what I just proved? A flicker of raw pain crossed his face, then vanished behind the king again. Morwen spoke, voice carrying to every corner. "No one touches her. Convene the witness circle at first light." Ilya protested immediately. "Majesty, delay gives her allies time to fabricate lineage claims. Do not instruct me in war court procedure, boy." His mouth snapped shut. The banquet collapsed into controlled panic. Delegates were escorted to chambers under guard. Musicians vanished. Servants cleared tables in frantic silence. Rumors multiplied in every corridor. Raven Wildfire bewitched the hall. Ember planned a coup. Morwen would order an execution at dawn. Lucian would nullify the session and call militias. In our assigned suite, Taryn barred the door, checked the latch twice, then rounded on me. Tell me exactly what you felt. Pressure. A pull downward. My hands were still shaking. Like claws at the back of my knees. My wolf refused. Not me. Not consciously. That distinction won't matter if we cannot anchor it in law. She dumped tablets across the table. Listen carefully. Most wolves cannot resist ceremonial call, involuntary response. Everyone knows it. That's why refusal is feared. But precedent from pre-ceasefire courts says refusal can mark co-sovereign blood. Rare, contested, useful, if we survive the morning. I sat on the edge of the bed and laughed once, sharp and humorless. He rejected me in front of the entire hall, and now I might be executed for not kneeling to his mother. Efficient evening. Taryn crouched in front of me, fierce and steady, hands braced on my knees until I stopped shaking enough to focus. Look at me, Raven. Public rejection does not void treaty talks. Diplomacy is between packs, not mating pairs, not wounded hearts. If you fall apart now, Ember loses corridor access and people starve. You hold. I swallowed and nodded because she was right, and because if I didn't hold, she would hold me upright by force. A knock sounded. 3 sharp raps. 1 pause. Taryn opened the door to Marshal Voss, flanked by 2 guards who stayed in the hall. He entered, removed his gloves, and set a sealed packet on the table. Official notice, he said. Witness circle at dawn in the old rotunda. 7 elders already summoned. Until ruling, Raven Wildfire is confined but not shackled. Generous, I muttered. Voss ignored the tone. Unofficially, someone tampered with hall protocols tonight. Taryn went still. Tampered how? The herald sequence for Morwen's entrance was altered. Her dominance call struck before warning chimes. That increased involuntary submission pressure and magnified your anomaly, Ilya. It had his scent all over it, metaphorically and probably literally. Can you prove sabotage? Taryn asked. Not yet. Then why tell us? Voss met my gaze, expression unreadable but not unkind. Because if this becomes a pure succession panic, people die before paperwork catches up. Bring evidence to the circle. Not outrage. Evidence. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Envoy's daughter, I've seen staged insolence. Yours look like terror. After he left, Taryn broke the seal on the notice. Her lips moved as she read, tracking citations line by line. Good, she said at last. They invoked constitutional custom, not emergency war powers, binding ruling. Morwen can't simply overrule it in anger. Can Lucian? No, not legally, once Circle is seated. Sleep never came. We spent the night building a case from ancestral registries, treaty codicils, and one brittle copy of the Ember Ironwood Emergency Accords signed during the Ash years. Wax dripped onto maps. Ink stained my fingertips black. Taryn made me rehearse answers until they sounded plain instead of defensive. If asked whether you seek the crown, I do not seek sole crown displacement. If asked whether you defied on purpose, I attempted compliance. Instinctive rank response prevented submission. She nodded. Again, with less fear. Near midnight, I stopped shaking and started getting angry in a way that felt clean. By third bell, I could recite 3 generations of maternal line markers without looking. Dawn found us still at the table, hair unbound, eyes burning, case assembled. At dawn, the old rotunda smelled of cold stone and incense ash. Frost silvered the window slits. The witness circle sat in a crescent on raised benches, 7 elders from different packs and lines, faces carved by weather and politics. Morwen occupied the observer's chair in full regalia, unreadable. Lucian stood to one side beside Voss, crown absent, as if this were military review and not the dismantling of his court. Ilya stood opposite me with Advocate Sorin, all polished confidence and expensive cuffs. He looked rested. That made me hate him more. "Proceed," intoned Elder Hesk, oldest of the seven. Sorin opened first, framing my refusal as deliberate insult designed to destabilize negotiations. "She seeks elevation through spectacle," he said. "No verified sovereign mark, no declared claim, only theatrical non-compliance at a state ritual during active treaty proceedings." Taryn rose. The claimant's behavior triggered review under pre-Crown Accord precedent 12C. Involuntary refusal under dominance call may indicate co-sovereign lineage. She requests examination, not coronation. Elder Nima leaned forward, bracelets clinking softly. "Raven Wildfire, did you choose to remain standing?" "No," I said honestly. "I tried to comply. My wolf would not bow." Murmurs rippled through the benches behind us. Elder Brand tapped his staff once for silence, the sound sharp as bone on stone. "Present lineage records," Hesk ordered. Taryn laid out copies. Ember maternal lines, wartime alliance bonds, a sealed testimony from 2014 Ashfall negotiations referencing a hidden succession contingency in case Drake direct line weakened during conflict. She arranged the documents by date, then by authority, anticipating objections before they came. I watched Ilya's smile thin as names surfaced he had assumed buried. Sorin attacked immediately. "Contingency language is symbolic. It confers no active rank." "Unless activated by recognized dominance marker," Taryn replied. "As occurred last night before 112 witnesses." Ilya stepped forward, unable to stay silent. "Or staged with pheromone trickery." Voss spoke for the first time. Hall search found no compound residues on Raven Wildfire. However, control gong timing mechanisms were manually altered before Dowager entrance. The rotunda stirred. One elder cursed under his breath. Elder Nima's eyes sharpened. "By whom?" "Investigation ongoing," Voss said. "Convenient," Ilya sneered. "Careful," Morwen said from the observer's chair, and Ilya actually flinched. Then came the part where I nearly lost everything. Elder Hesk asked, "Do you claim throne right?" The air changed. Even the guards seemed to lean. "No." If I said yes, civil fracture. If I said no, I erased what my wolf had revealed and left room for immediate conviction as insolent subordinate. I could feel Lucian watching me, not intervening, which made the choice feel lonelier and clearer. I answered carefully. "I claim sovereign standing under old accords for treaty governance and succession stabilization. I do not claim sole crown displacement." Silence. Then Elder Brand nodded once, approving precision. Sorin tried a new angle. "Even if standing exists, why did no one know? Hidden blood conveniently emerges when food corridors are contested?" "Because women were erased from ledgers when men got nervous," I thought. "Because power hates witnesses it did not select. Because secrets are cheap until famine makes them expensive." Instead, I said, "Ask why records were sealed, not why they survived." Taryn requested ancestral verification right, blood scent comparison against preserved accord relics, archaic but admissible. Ilya objected as theatrics. The circle allowed it 5-2. A bronze casket was brought from archive custody, seals intact. Inside lay the ash-scarred treaty cord from 2014, woven with line markers of signatory houses. Age had darkened the braid. Soot still stained one end from the year of raids and fire. My palms sweated as Elder Nima cut my thumb and pressed blood to the old fibers. The sting was sharp, grounding. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the cord darkened, warmed, and pulsed faint ember heat. Response mark known to every elder in that room and ignored by no one. Ilya swore under his breath. Sorin went pale. Elder Hesk conferred quietly with the others. 7 heads bent, 7 histories colliding. One elder argued in whispers, jabbing a finger at the records. Another sat back, eyes closed as if listening to something older than law. When they straightened, the room felt smaller. Ruling, Hesk said. By 6 votes to 1, Raven Wildfire is recognized as sovereign line co-equal for Treaty Council authority under Ashfall contingencies. Refusal to bow is validated as rank manifestation, not treason. Execution claims void. Air rushed back into my lungs so hard I nearly staggered. Hesk continued. Scope is limited to governance matters relevant to accord stability. No automatic crown transfer. Further constitutional clarification required at final treaty session. Morwen's face remained stone, but her fingers tightened on her chair arm until her knuckles blanched. Ilya lunged for one last blow. Then any hidden bastard can stand and demand power? Voss moved before anyone else, hand on sword hilt. One more outburst and I remove you. Lucian finally spoke, voice flat with contained force. The circle has ruled, we proceed by law. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt hollowed out, like survival had scooped me clean and left only function. Outside the rotunda, winter light spilled across the courtyard. The cold hit my face and made me realize how hot my skin had been inside. Lucian caught my arm before I reached the stairs. Walk with me, he said. I'm not in the mood to be managed, Your Majesty. His jaw tightened. Then be furious while walking. We crossed into the old East Gallery where cracked mosaics showed forgotten queens holding spears beside kings. Dust hung in pale shafts of light. No guards followed. For the first time since last night, we were alone without witnesses, and that felt more dangerous than the trial. He stopped by a narrow window. I knew, he said. I went very still. Knew what? That you might be co-sovereign line. His voice roughened. I suspected from records my father hid. I didn't confirm because if I did, Morwen's block would move against you before I could protect you. I laughed in disbelief. Protect me? You humiliated me in front of the entire court. Yes. He flinched but did not look away. Because if I publicly favored you before the circle recognized you, half the nobles would call you my weakness and the other half would call you my puppet. Either way, they would challenge your legitimacy and maybe your life. I needed the claim to emerge independently. By shredding me first? By making myself look cold enough that no one thought this was planned. Anger surged so hard my vision blurred. You do not get to turn betrayal into strategy and expect gratitude. I'm not asking gratitude. His hands opened at his sides, empty. I'm asking you to understand the board I was playing on. The board where I'm a piece. The board where you were a target. For a heartbeat, I saw the exhaustion beneath his control, the sleepless calculation, the fear he almost never showed. It did not erase what he had done. It did explain the shape of it. You should have told me, I said. Yes. You should have trusted me with my own risk. Yes. I don't forgive you. He nodded once, accepting the hit. I still need you at final session. Not for appearance, for governance. We cannot get corridor votes without your signature now. Need is not the same as trust. No. He stepped closer, slow enough to stop if I moved back. So set conditions. I held his gaze and made each word a contract. Public apology before signing. Not private. In front of council. His expression tightened, then steadied. Done. Dual signature governance written into treaty articles, not symbolic language. Done. Maternal veto reduced from binding custom to suspensive delay only, maximum 10 days, override by council majority. A startled bark of laughter escaped him, brief and almost real. You negotiate like Terran. I was raised by Terran. Then done, if we can secure votes. I drew breath, tasted old hurt and new possibility. And if you ever use me as sacrificial distraction again, I walk. I believe you. Before I could answer, Voss appeared at the gallery entrance. Majesty, envoy wildfire, urgent. His face was granite. That usually meant blood or scandal. Today, perhaps both. In the security chamber below the West Tower, a young herald sat trembling beside a confiscated toolkit. Voss closed the door behind us and posted a guard outside. "This is Perrin," he said. "He serviced the entry gongs last night." Perrin wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands shook so hard the bench rattled. I was paid," he whispered. "Lord Ilya said it was a test run for winter ceremonies. He gave me access writ with seal." Voss set the writ on the table. Ilya's signet impression glared in red wax. "He ordered the warning chimes delayed by 12 counts," Voss said. "Enough to ensure Morwen's call hit without preparation." Lucian's expression went lethal. "Why?" Perrin swallowed hard. He said if the Ember Girl failed to bow at full call, it would prove treason and collapse corridor talks. Then emergency powers could postpone treaty and reopen succession challenge. There it was. Not just petty cruelty. Planned destabilization for political gain during food crisis. People would have died for his ambition, and he would have called it necessity. Taryn arrived moments later, cloak half-fastened from hurrying, took one look at the evidence, and let out a slow exhale that sounded like a blade leaving sheath. "We present this before council immediately." Morwen demanded private review first, asserting royal household jurisdiction. Voss refused on legal grounds. Sabotage affecting treaty process fell under council security and witness circle oversight. For once, Lucian backed him without hesitation, voice clipped and final. By noon, Ilya stood in the council chamber ringed by guards, composure cracking around the edges though he still wore arrogance like armor. "This is fabrication," he spat, "a frightened servant and a forged writ." Voss produced ledger entries, corridor camera glyph records, and payment tokens traced to Thorn accounts. Taryn connected motive to Ilya's prior motions delaying hunting access and documented his procedural objections across 2 seasons. Elder Nima, still seated as circle representative, confirmed tampering constituted procedural attack on a binding succession review. Ilya turned desperate and loud. "Majesty, you cannot let Ember opportunists purge Drake blood rivals under false pretenses." Lucian's voice went cold enough to frost. "You are not on trial for rivalry. You are on trial for sabotage during famine negotiations." Morwen watched from the side, lips pressed thin. I could almost hear her calculating whether defending him preserved her block or drowned it with him. He made it easy for her. "If corridors open, border pacts grow stronger than the crown," Ilya snapped. "You think sharing power makes peace? It makes prey." Gasps. Even his allies recoiled. One lord physically stepped back as if contagion had become visible. Taryn leaned toward me and whispered, "He just admitted intent to weaponize hunger. Gods bless vanity." The council vote for sanction was swift. Guilty by supermajority. Terms were read by Marshal Voss, each word crisp enough to cut. "Ilya Thorn is stripped of court title and claim privileges. He is exiled 300 miles beyond the Ironwood border, effective at moonrise. Return before term remission equals death sentence." 300? Ilya laughed, brittle and disbelieving. "You'd send me into mountain lawless zones." Voss didn't blink. "You chose your terrain when you chose sabotage." As he was let out, Ilya twisted to glare at me. "You think this ends with signatures? Wolves remember blood better than ink." "Then remember this one," I said. "Law cut you, not me." When the doors shut behind him, the chamber exhaled. External sabotage had been named, contained, punished. That should have made everything simpler. It didn't, because now we still had to rewrite power without starting another war. Final session convened at dusk 2 days after the Banquet disaster, in the same hall where I had stood alone amid kneeling courtiers. The spilled wine stains had been scrubbed from stone. Memory hadn't. Delegates packed the tables, hungry for resolution or spectacle, depending on how they profited. Taryn sat at my right with amended drafts stacked in disciplined towers. Lucian sat opposite as crown signatory, expression unreadable. Morwen occupied the dowager's seat, regal and furious in measured increments. Voss stood central as enforcement witness. 7 elders from the witness circle observed from the rear gallery, their presence a reminder that rulings were binding, not decorative. Taryn opened with corridor necessity data, herd maps, projected winter deficits, raid risk models, and supply route bottlenecks. Absent coordinated access, she said, tapping the charts. Mortality rises across 3 packs by first thaw. This council was created in 2014 to prevent exactly that. Lucian followed with enforcement commitments, shared patrol commands, grain release guarantees, and conflict arbitration routes. Professional. Precise. No one could accuse him of sentiment now. He sounded like steel reading scripture. Then came governance clauses. Article 4, Taryn read. Treaty Council authority requires dual signature for corridor activation, reigning monarch and recognized co-sovereign representative under Ashfall contingency. Murmurs. Pushback expected. Lord Bren stood again, apparently determined to be consistent in bad timing. Dual signature invites paralysis. If either side stalls, people freeze, I answered before Taryn could. Single signature invited manipulation by whoever controlled private access to that signer. You saw the result this week. A few nods. Not enough. Morwen rose, every eye snapping to her. Her voice was calm and heavy as old iron. I held maternal veto to stabilize this court after my husband's death and my son's minority. You now seek to sever that safeguard in a season of scarcity. Reckless. No one spoke. Challenging Morwen publicly had ended careers for a decade. I stood. My legs remembered that first night and nearly trembled. I locked my knees and kept my voice level. Dowager Queen, your experience is not in question, but maternal veto has always been custom, not codified law. Custom cannot overrule binding council charter indefinitely. Her eyes narrowed. You lecture me on law after 1 week in my hall? 2 years in envoy training under Taryn Wildfire, I said evenly. And 12 years of watching annual banquets fail to solve predictable crises because unofficial power blocked accountable votes. That landed. Hard. Even delegates hostile to Ember could not pretend the old bottlenecks hadn't cost them. Taryn slid the amendment copy forward. Revised clause. Dowager objection may impose suspensive delay up to 10 days. Thereafter council majority can override. Advisory role preserved, unilateral stop removed. Morwen looked to Lucian as if daring him to betray blood. He met her gaze and, after a long beat, inclined his head. I support the amendment. The hall erupted. Shocked voices, angry whispers, relieved laughter from packs long throttled by palace bottlenecks. A cup shattered near the west wall. No one bothered to pick it up. Morwen turned to stone. You would reduce your mother in public. I would stabilize succession law in public, he said, as king. For a second I thought she might walk out and shatter the vote. Instead, she sat, rigid as carved obsidian. Debate ran another 3 hours. We haggled patrol ratios, sanction triggers, and grain escrow mechanisms until candles guttered and ink dried on fingertips. At one point, Elder Bran called recess because 2 lords nearly fought over river toll language. At another, Voss quietly removed a drunk delegate before he could derail quorum. Taryn took no prisoners and no breaks. I countered objections until my throat scraped raw. Lucian backed enforcement clauses I expected him to soften. He didn't. Through all of it, he and I worked across the same documents without touching. There was tension, yes, and something else. New respect forged under pressure, less romantic than what we had before, and far more durable. Near midnight, final text was read aloud. Hunting corridor access term. 5 years. Renewable by review. Dual signature governance. Adopted. Maternal veto. Converted to 10-day suspensive delay. Overridable by majority. Witness circle jurisdiction over succession disputes. Reaffirmed binding. Emergency sabotage penalties. Expanded with mandatory transparent review. When the call for signatures came, Lucian stood first. Before he took the pen, he looked at the hall, and then at me. "I owe correction," he said, voice carrying to gallery stone. At opening banquet, I stated I held no intention of elevating Raven Wildfire beyond delegation station. That statement was politically motivated and personally dishonorable. It humiliated a lawful equal and undermined trust during critical negotiations. I apologize publicly to Raven Wildfire and to this council. A stillness spread, the rare kind built from genuine surprise rather than fear. He turned toward me fully. I was wrong. The hurt in me did not vanish, but something unclenched. I stood. Apology acknowledged, not forgotten. We proceed. A few people laughed, nervous and impressed. Bren looked like he'd swallowed a thorn. We signed together, his hand first, mine beside it, ink black and final under wax and witness marks. The hall did not cheer immediately. They were too busy realizing what had changed and what that change would cost them. Then Taryn, practical as dawn, thumped her staff once and said, "By authority vested through Ashfall Charter and Witness Circle ruling, the treaty passes." Cheering broke like surf. By formal consequence of the adopted governance article, I was installed that night as co-regent of the Treaty Council. Limited scope, enormous impact. Not a queen, not a consort tucked behind someone else's title. A co-equal signatory with defined authority and public accountability. Morwen rose before celebrations began in earnest. She crossed the floor with every eye on her and stopped in front of me, close enough that I saw old scars at her temple under the silver braid. "You did not bow," she said softly. "No." Perhaps the hall needed reminding that instinct is older than etiquette. I couldn't tell if it was concession or warning, maybe both. In her face I saw anger, calculation, and a grudging recognition she would never call respect where anyone could hear. She straightened and addressed the council. "I depart at first light to the ancestral keep at Black Ridge. My advisory dispatches will continue under amended law." There it was, not exile, but retreat. Loss of unilateral authority made visible. She left without waiting for response, silver braid cutting through candlelight like a blade. Later, when most delegates had stumbled off to drink victory or mourn defeat, I found myself on the north balcony under a hard, clear sky. Snow scent rode the wind. Below, courtyards glowed with lanterns and distant song. Somewhere in the lower kitchens, someone had started a drum, and others were clapping along offbeat. Lucian stepped out beside me. No crown, no audience. Coat unfastened at the throat as if even kings eventually needed air. "We did it," he said, sounding almost surprised. "We survived it," I corrected. He nodded. "Fair." For a while we stood in companionable silence, wolves settling after too many days at war with everything. My shoulders ached. His hands were ink-stained like mine. Then he said, "About us. I won't assume. Not after this week." Good. He was learning. "I choose slowly now," I said, "with witnesses when needed." "As you should." I turned to face him. "I am willing to explore a bond, by choice. No announcements until I say, no political theater." His eyes warmed, cautious and fierce all at once. "By choice, then." He offered his forearm, old custom for equals entering voluntary mate courtship. Not ownership. Invitation. I laid my hand over his pulse and felt it jump once under my palm. Somewhere deep, my wolf lifted her head and, this time, did not bare teeth. At moonrise, Voss supervised Ilya's departure from the West Gate with 6 riders and sealed orders marking the 300-mile exile boundary beyond Ironwood border. No one toasted him. No one argued. The gate opened, swallowed him, shut. At dawn, Morwen's carriage rolled toward Black Ridge Ancestral Keep, banners furled but intact. Power diminished, not erased. Law had done what blades usually did worse. By midday, Terran had 3 copies of the treaty dispatched to Ember, Ironwood, and Neutral Archive, each marked with dual signatures and witness circle seal. Paperwork, she said with profound satisfaction, tapping drying wax, is how you make victory survive sleep. Within a week, shared patrols opened the first corridor segment. Grain wagons moved under mixed escort. Border villages that had been counting sacks by handfuls started counting in months again. Scouts reported fewer theft attempts along the Ridge Road. For the first time all season, panic eased enough for people to plan beyond tomorrow. And once each year, as required since 2014, the treaty banquet would still be held. Because peace is not an event, Terran liked to say, it is a recurring administrative burden with table settings. I attended the next planning session as co-regent, not as someone hoping to be seen. People still stared when I entered. Let them. Staring cost less than starving. I had stood when instinct said stand. I had bent when law required precision. I had learned the difference between being chosen and choosing. In the end, that difference remade a kingdom.